Hopefully that will do what I want it to do. Ha 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 ha. Okay, so I came back to do the typical talk and the typical conversation. I hope everybody is having a great day. I did see a couple of things that kind of weirded me out, so we're back on this topic because it just seems to be a topic that's needed on a regular basis. So here we are with it. Um, I would love it if you're watching, if you could share the live and if you double tap the screen, it will share it out as well and get more people to be able to see it. It hasn't been coming across a lot of people's feeds lately. I know I've been told by a few people. And so if you have the ability to or the desire to, that's a huge help. Um, I was working on some stuff this morning. I've kind of put it aside. I think I got it to finally work, and we'll probably be working on it together again later, but I figured I really wanted to do this, so I'm going to go ahead and do this since I wanted to make sure I got in today and keep up on that attempt to try and stay active doing things. Oh, shit. I totally fucked up my desk when I moved it a bit. My desk doesn't want to behave. So I figured I'd come in and just talk a little bit about the things that we've been talking about. We have discussed this before. We have had a couple lives covering this before. It is, for me, extremely important, especially, when we get to things like cultural appropriation and we get to things like having so many people who are actually like taking over cultures that they're not supposed to be or doing things within culture that they shouldn't be doing or outside of culture. And we see this a lot, especially now that we're a lot on social media and there's that global scale. And so I think that this is a really important thing to really be involved in, is this understanding of, what is European for tattooing and what isn't, what is appropriate, what is cultural appropriation and what isn't. And so we'll talk about this a little bit more today. I think for me in this conversation, it's really important to see the compassion and empathy that we almost all societies and faiths seem to really think is important, and yet doesn't seem to be really followed a lot anymore. And so for me, having that compassion and empathy is a really huge thing. And it's also really huge to see that compassion and empathy really translates out into, making sure that you're not harming other people, not just in, making sure that you're not out beating people up, right? But making sure that you're not harming people, in different things like cultural appropriation, stealing from people. So I think that when we're looking at these things, these are really important. These are one of those things that really double down on whether or not you're actually, making a difference, making an attempt to make a difference, or if you're participating in colonialism, participating in the, kind of shit show that's around us. If you're unaware, Indigenous people on a global scale are trying to get their rights back, get their land back, get the ability to have these things back, right? Wow. And across the globe, we're seeing that groups of Indigenous people are really trying to find a space where they can have autonomy, have control over themselves, have control over their space. Um, and not like they want to micromanage things, right? Or control things, but just to be able to have the ability to speak with their own voice, to talk about their own experiences, and to have the ability to make their own choices, right? To see themselves as whole beings and not be treated like they are, something to be mocked or something to be disparaged. And when we see this across the globe, because we do again see it across the globe, we see that in other spaces, Indigenous voices are asking for respect for all Indigenous voices as well. So it is definitely something where you're seeing this broad scale of need, this broad scale of understanding, and this broad scale of unification. And we really don't seem to see that sometimes. There's a lot of, lateral crap going on. So when you're trying to return to your ancestry and to follow your own ancestors without appropriating from other people, it's really important to understand the things that your ancestors had and the things that they were a part of it. Really, every space, every people is indigenous to some space, right? Every space has indigenous people, and every space has, every people has space that they start at, that is their home, that is what is their connection. And when you disconnect from that, that becomes very problematic for a lot of people in their internal, in their mental capacity, their mental health, right? Uh, so understanding that, and then understanding that when you're being healthy and respectful and understanding, connecting to a space that you're in is totally understandable and acceptable. Like, um, say that your entire indigeneity is over in the Levant area, right? Maybe that's where your family lived and lived and lived until something happened and you had to immigrate. And then you've been in a space for a couple of generations. It is perfectly respectable, acceptable, and understandable to speak to the ancestors in that space, knowing that they're not your ancestors, but talk to them in love and respect, or to communicate with them, to sink yourself into that space. It's not okay to sink yourself into that space as your voice mattering more, or your voice overtaking the people who are indigenous to that space. It is okay to connect though, right? And that connection is really important. So if you are feeling that loss of connection and you are in a space that is a diaspora, or a space that is not where your ancestry is originally from, it is absolutely acceptable to connect. Hi, Fable. Absolutely acceptable to connect in that indigenous manner, and bring the wisdom of indigeneity that your ancestors had to how you speak to the trees in the area, or how you speak to the land in the area, right? Again, you have to make sure that you understand that people who are indigenous to that area understand the trees and the land in that area better than you do. And so their voice should take paramount over yours when it comes to things having to do with the trees and the land in that area, right? Uh, Yet it's still an ability to connect in that feeling of disconnection that so many of us have. It's very important that when we disconnect, that we have, or when we connect, that we connect in a way that doesn't overshadow or overrule other people, and that we connect in a way that brings our own ancestry into it, right? Instead of connecting into somebody else's ancestry. So we see this a lot of times with things like white sage, which is specific to California. It's indigenous to California, and many groups have asked that people not use something that's ceremonial without, being taught how to use something that's ceremonial, or being a part of that ceremonial feeling. Um, when you're looking at that, you're seeing a request of understanding. It's not stating that you can't use air cleansing techniques that are from your indigenous ancestry. It's asking not to use air cleansing techniques from a different ancestry. The same thing can be said when it comes to tattoos. The same thing can be said when it comes to patterns. The same thing that can be said when it comes to um, connection, faith, the way that we interact. Those things are all very deep within us. They register in our bones, really like our ancestors register in our bones, because they are things that our ancestors had, right? So they speak to our ancestors, and they speak to us in a way that things that are not our ancestors don't speak to us as easily. So if we're looking at things like air cleansing, using rose, which is a global thing, is a totally acceptable way to air cleanse without, appropriating somebody else's stuff. When we're looking at things like tattooing or patterns or different designs, there are 1,000 different ways that you can interact without stealing from people. Today, we're going to talk specifically about tattooing. We talk broadly about the fact that certain things are pretty cross cultural frequently. And we will discuss also juniper and bay. That's really awesome. We're going to discuss also the differences between appropriation and appreciation. So, the first things that we want to look at are how far back tattooing actually goes for us. We see that the idea of a unique identity that we might decorate ourselves with goes as far back as the Neanderthals. We see it roughly, I think it's like 70 to 80,000 years ago that we start to see decoration of self within the Neanderthals and within us. We see it first really within the Neanderthals, and then we start to see it within us. In this, absolutely, Luna, in this understanding of decoration of self, we start to see that. So we believe, though, of course, we haven't found mummies of Neanderthals and stuff like that, but we believe that they're painting skin. And the reason that we believe that they're painting skin is because you will find shells or stones where it's obvious that you're mixing ochre. Uh, you will find shells that are wearables, so you're carrying them around with you like they're a pallet to mix your ochre in, which is not something you're doing if you're a jewelry maker mixing ochre to put on your jewels, or a clothing maker mixing ochre to put on your clothing, um, to stain or dye your clothing. It's only something that you're doing if you're identifying yourself, painting your face with ochre or painting your body with ochre. If you're a jewelry maker or if you're a clothing maker and you're using this as dyes for these items, then it's going to be in your kit for making that jewelry or making that clothing. It's not going to be a wearable. It's going to be something you store with your kit. I'm going to pull out my leather working tools. And as I pull out my leather working tools, I'm going to find the shell that I mix my ochre in. But if it's placed to where I can wear it on my neck, then it's most likely something that I mix my ochre in, because then I carry a little stick of ochre or a little chunk of ochre in my belt pouch or whatever bag or way that I'm carrying things at this period of time. And I'll grind a little bit down in that shell and mix it with some water or some grease of some kind and then paint my face with it, right? To our current knowledge, the earliest paintings that we see really are cave paintings, and we do see both charcoal and ochre used in the cave paintings. We do not see, so it's going to be really hard for us to kind of tell if something is being used to mix charcoal. And the reasoning behind that is, why is it black? Is it black because somebody's mixing charcoal, or is it black because it got charred, right? Is it black because there's a pigment on it? And a lot of times it's a little bit harder for archaeologists to really distinguish. So, to my understanding, we haven't found palettes where they're actually mixing charcoal that we can tell that they're actually mixing charcoal. So, uh, to my understanding, currently we've only seen actual mix of, or a palette or something where they're actually mixing with ochre. That doesn't mean that it's not out there. It just means that, it might be out there and it's not understood. It might be out there and we think it's something else, which is where we come into our earliest tattooing implements. We realized uh, about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe it's 10 years ago, maybe it's a little earlier. There's an article that is on the website under tattooing. There's a journal, and I think like I actually uploaded the document so that people could get to the journal, but I can't remember. And one of the articles in it is discussing how they really realized that there are tattooing implements farther back than we realized or had realized, and that we have been overlooking them. So a lot of times, especially, and we've talked about this before, when you get a lot of Western archaeologists looking at things, they're only looking at things through their thought process of Western thought, right? So they can't look at something and see it. You can't you can't look at something that's innately indigenous if you've never had an innately indigenous thought process and see that it is something, right? Like if you recently, uh, there are these different arrow shafts or spear shafts or thin wooden shafts that have loops on either side of them that are kind of embedded into the shaft. European archaeologists have been looking at this for dozens and dozens of years, going, well, maybe that's decorative, maybe that's something else, maybe that's this, maybe that's that. We don't know what that is. And somebody who studied spear throwers and atlatls and have been over in the Turtle Islands studying archaeology over here and understanding over here, and I do not know their personal history, I just know that they have been studying atlatls, looks at it and goes, oh, that's a spear thrower. Those are the notches, the loops that you use to be able to chuck a spear because it involves like threading stuff through. I don't understand spear throwers that, perfectly, but that's actually notches from it. Those are loops for a spear thrower. So it took somebody understanding in the indigenous thought process of how to do this or an indigenous tool to understand that this tool is actually this tool because everybody else is like, oh, it's decorative. Oh, it's this because they hadn't had the concept of spear throwers. They hadn't had the concept of atlatls. I'm not sure why. I think that we've known that. I mean, I know archaeologists who have talked about the fact that we believe that, 30, 40,000 years ago, we were using atlatls in Europe. So, like, I'm not exactly sure why the European archaeologists aren't grasping that, but they weren't. So when we're looking at things, a lot of times, if you're looking at them through a very narrow lens, you're not going to pick up what that thought process actually is because it's 30,000 years, right? Like it's 10,000 years. It's a long time ago, and you didn't have that same thought process. You've been indoctrinated into a different one. Um, so when we're looking at tattooing tools, what we have found is that there are tattooing tools that date back 35,000 years ago in caves in France. Um, the Masi Yahtzee cave. Let me double check this pronunciation or what the actual cave is. It's right on the edge of the topmost edge of the Iberian Peninsula, where France and Iberia kind of meet. So the bottom edge of France and the topmost edge of Iberia. It is in the tattoos and body modification in antiquity page on the website. You will have to go to and get the full PDF for it there, just because of the fact that I can't upload the PDF itself, and I can't give, like, if I don't link you to the site of being able to upload it, you won't be able to see it. Let me look if I can pull it up this way. What is its name? What is its name? Let me find. I want to make sure that I get the exact name of the cave. But there is this cave in France, and we can tell now that at what we have thought, I'm not being able to grab it and get to it easily. So we can tell that what we have thought has been flakes from actually flint knapping are actually tiny flakes with a singular point on them. So these are actual tattooing tools. And we can look at these flakes with a singular point on them and see that they have both residue of tattooing substances. And in this case, charcoal is that residue that we see, and blood. And so we can see that these are actually single point tattooing tools that are going back 35,000 years ago in a cave in France. When we're looking at this, we're also seeing that the way tattooing goes early on, it is really everywhere, right? Our oldest mummy with tattooing on it is in Peru, and it's a mustache tattoo, and it's like 8,000 years old. Otzi is like 6,000 years old, I believe. And Otzi, we know He comes from the Polish Alps. This is who's behind me. Otzi's mother was from the Alps. Hi, Sleepy. But Otzi's father, the DNA shows that Otzi's father was from Sweden and Bulgaria. Otzi's tattoos are all therapeutic tattoos to our understanding, and they're all along meridians and tattoo points or pressure points or um, acupuncture points that we still use today. And the charcoal in Otzi's tattoos is from burning herbs. Oh, that's cool. The charcoal from burning herbs was used to create the tattoos for Otzi, and the herbs that were burnt were herbs that are directly linked to some of the issues that he was dealing with, some of the biological issues that we can see, some of his health problems. So we still use those herbs with herbology today to get us there. When we're looking at this, what it shows us is that, what is that on my screen? Sorry, weird things TikTok is coming up with these days. I have a weird star. Oh, okay. Um, I don't remember off the top of my head which herbs, but there are articles that have it, and I have articles somewhere. I just haven't pulled them up recently. They are local herbs from the Alps, though. And we do see that he also had some of these herbs in his catch, like in his belongings, to my memory. So I believe one of them has to do with stomach, but I can't remember which one it is, like off the top of my head, right? But there are some there, and there's so we see with Otzi's tattoos that Otzi's tattoos are redone several times. Like, so they're fading out and they're being redone. And as they're fading out and being redone, they're being redone with the same herbs too. Like, so if so one of Otzi's tattoos, oh, it's not showing on this one. One of Otzi's tattoos is like on the wrist, and it's like a crosshatch tattoo. And that crosshatch tattoo, right? You can see where it's faded out and it's been redone, but the same herbs are being used as it's being redone. Um, they see that with most of Otzi's tattoos. We're also seeing that the Scythians seem to be pretty tattooed. There are several different locations around Europe where we see tattoos in mummies pretty early on. I actually mapped some of them. I'm going to go ahead and pull them up so that I can see where or talk about where the different places are. Actually, I think this will give me the cave that I want. Yes. So Mas de Ezel, Grotto de Mas de Ezel, du Mas de Ezel is the cave in France that is the site where we're finding our earliest tattooing tools. Otzi is coming from the Troyal Alps. These are Alps that are just above, where the Alps are just above Italy, and the northern part of these Alps are definitely like Polish and different areas that are Germanic in descent. We also see evidence of tattoos on mummies in the Carpathian Mountains. These are Scythians. And we also have tattooed mummies in and so we have a tattooed mummy in the Tarim Basin in China, but the tattoos on this mummy are the same styles of tattoo that we're seeing in other tattoos that are in Scythia at the time, in Western Europe at the time. Yes, Monty, with Otzi's tattoos, all of them seem to be along acupunctural points that we're still using today. And the charcoal, the pigment used in them are all based on herbs that are helpful for medical ailments that we see within his body. So we're seeing that tattooing really is going across the Eurasian continent for quite a few thousands of years, right? So again, we see that first tool usage at 35,000 years ago. Our first mummies that we're seeing, Otzi is our oldest within Eurasia. There is the one in Peru, and recently we found mummies in Egypt with tattoos that predate Otzi by like 1,000 years, not too far, but by like 1,000 years. So we're seeing that there is this cross of Eurasia of tattooing culture, and much of the tattooing culture within this cross of Eurasia is very much similar. very much the same themes, very much the same thought processes. When we get further down the line, we're seeing with the Picts, we see documentation in history from historical sources. We see the Romans writing about the Picts and the Pictones, two different groups. Uh, though some of their, so though their Y DNA is similar, their mitochondrial DNA isn't necessarily, but two distinct groups. Are semi-distinct groups. And when we're looking at that, we're seeing with the Picts that they tattoo from scalp to toe, but they're tattooed in flowers and animals. And they use woad, and it's documented by the Romans as single needle and woad. It's documented as an ink made from the woad and using that to tattoo, which leads me to wonder if a lot of the documentation about Celts going into battle heavily painted with woad might actually be woad tattoos on some cases, because we know that many different groups of Celts were documented as going into battle with heavily painted woad on their bodies. When we're looking at the historical documentation of tattooing among the Scandinavian peoples, we're seeing that even oh my blessed mother, if I'm going to be able to actually I never actually get his name right, and it's not like I don't know Islamic names. It's not like I don't have plenty of evidence of Islamic names. Let me find, yes, there we go. Ahmed ibn Fadlan. And this is an Arab traveler. He was from Baghdad, and he is in Volga, in middle of Russia, right? And he meets up with Swedish Vikings. And when he meets up with the Rus, who are a Swedish Viking group, he notes that they have tattoos all over their bodies, and their tattoos end at the chin. So their tattoos come up to here, not at the chin, but at the top of the neck. Their tattoos, they tattoo at the neck. And the documentation that Fadlan has of these tattoos is that it's trees and flowers and that they're green, which we believe is because they're dark blue, which is wood ash, uh, and that he is visualizing it as green, like his visual of it is green, which is absolutely understandable. We now know that, people will see different color scales than other people, and so he might be visualizing this as green, especially if because he documents it as looking like trees and flowers and symbols. And we believe that it could have been, trees, but it could also have been the knotwork patterns that we see with Vikings, because a lot of the knotwork patterns have beasts and stuff coming out of them and have leaf work in them and stuff like that. And so with that, it could absolutely be that he's seeing those knotwork patterns as trees. It could be that the dark green that he is seeing is actually a dark blue. So this is actually historical documentation in two separate groups. Again, the Nordic groups are coming down from their Germanic groups, and the Celtic groups are the Picts and the Pictonians are coming down from the Celtic groups. Overall, we have the Germanic group up north and the Celtic group down south. And of course, there are many different nations and many individualized space within this, and many, cultures within this that individualize and some don't, aren't documented as using tattooing. We do see that the Romans actually document a broader scale of tattooing than most people have in the past believed. When we look at the documentation within the Romans, we're seeing that the Romans actually document the Thracians, the Scythians, the Dacians, the Gauls, the Picts, and the Celts, and the Britons, to name just a few of the people that they understood as having tattooing, as using tattooing. The Romans document a lot of penal tattooing. The Persians tend to use tattooing as a penal thing, as a punishment thing, as a, like a T on your cheek because you're a thief kind of thing, right? We also see that it has to do with slavery sometimes, that there is a tattooing of prisoners and a tattooing of slaves. Romans marked their slaves with tattoos to show that their taxes have been paid. So, and we absolutely see, like, there's early tattooing among like the gladiators get tattooed, early Christians get tattooed when they're sent to the mines. Um, we see that some of these cultures are using tattooing as a punishment, as a penal system, as a slavery system, and some of these are using them as marks of valor. We see that the Thracians tattooing marks noble birth. And we see that this is documented in some of the artwork. Like one of the links that you can go to off of my site shows Thracian, or it's Thracian vessel that shows a Thracian mermaid, or Maenad, not mermaid, sorry, Maenad, tattooed with like, it almost looks like either chevrons or birds down her arms, right? We're seeing that our oldest like evidence of tattooing within anthropomorphical figurines. Hold on one second. I need to get a drink really quick. Yes, Twitch, I hear you. I hear you. We're seeing that our oldest documentation of or some of our oldest documentation of anthropomorphic or figurines shows tattooing. There's a lot of ceramic figurines that really show this evidence of, like, there's one on the site as well underneath the archaeology.org site. There's from the Cucuteni culture in Romania from the 5th millennia BC. There's a kind of a goddess or a warrior figurine in which the entire body is covered with swirls and lines and, different motif. I was showing the other day the picture of the new find that came out that is our now oldest anthropomorphic or figurine period that we have. That is the lion-headed figurine. And if you look at the lion-headed figurine, you'll see on the arm that is facing in most of the pictures that there are 5 sideways marks that look like they're kind of engraved into the arm. This could absolutely be evidence of tattooing or scarification. And in something like that, it might indicate a level of rank, a level of award, right? So we do absolutely see that across Eurasia, there is this huge presence of tattooing culture. There are several mummies that are found in the Altai Mountains in Siberia that have intricate tattoos of both mythical and real animals. And we are currently finding that a lot of the, this is why we're finding all the tattoos on mummies recently. Hello. This is why we're finding all the tattoos on mummies recently, is that they've realized that as they're pulling a body out of a grave, the skin starts to darken. It's because it's exposed to the air. And a lot of times in that darkening of the skin, we actually miss the tattoos on the skin. And so now they're using infrared to scan, and they're able to pick up the tattoo ink within the infrared. And in picking up the tattoo ink within the infrared, they're able to actually see different tattooings. And this is how they were actually able to find the recent tattoos that they found on Egyptian mummies. And they've also found within several Scythian places and tattoo graves that there's a presence of tattooing that wasn't picked up before. And there's a couple other spaces where they're seeing that there's actually a presence of tattooing on mummies that they haven't picked up before. And so when we're looking at that, what it's showing us is that on a broad scale, you're seeing that self-decoration is pretty much a global thing. Whether that self-decoration involves the painting of the body, whether it involves the tattooing of the body, whether it involves scarification, it is pretty much global. We see that the earliest evidence of tattooing going back 35,000 years in France is really kind of going across space. Like, it doesn't stay there, it goes across space. It makes a whole lot of sense to me that if we're seeing this in France 35,000 years ago, but we're seeing the first evidence of it, we're only just now seeing it, right? Because of the fact that we were dismissing these tools beforehand. So now we have to go back through and look and see, okay, so all of these flakes, are all of these flakes, or all of these flakes actually single point tattoo tools, right? So we have to go back and look through that. And then as we're looking through that, it makes sense to me personally that it probably goes back a little bit further because of the fact that we see it go around the globe. So I believe that it would have gone back. What are you into? Sorry, I heard a cat into something. I would believe, and it makes sense to me, that if you're looking, um, anything that we're looking at that is pretty global or universal in its thought process has a tendency to be something that we have earlier in our thought process before dissemination across the planet, right? And so it would make sense to me, since tattooing really is something that we see in all areas across the globe, that this is something that we would have picked up earlier on, that this is something that we would have had earlier on. At 35,000 years ago in a cave in France, Neanderthals are still around because the oldest Neanderthals are in a cave in the very south of Iberia in the Strait of Gibraltar at 30,000 years. So, I mean, this is the area that Neanderthals are in this time space. So it makes sense that, and to our knowledge, this is absolutely a cave of sapiens, but there is evidence of further back occupation, which would mean it would also have evidence of Neanderthal occupation. These tattoo tools are definitely on a level that is, to my knowledge, sapient. But I do know that the leveling within the cave goes back 65,000 years ago, which is a time period before sapien makes it into France. So at this point of time, at 65,000 years ago, the occupants of that cave are absolutely Neanderthal, right? So, and it is in the same areas that we start to find our first cave art at 65,000 years ago. So it makes total sense to me that you might find a correlation at this time period, and which would make total sense that it was going back further than we currently have knowledge of. So many things go back further than we currently have knowledge of, anyways. So this wouldn't be unusual, anyways. I could speculate that it might possibly be attached a Neanderthal thing at some point. Again, I speculate that. It doesn't mean it is. It doesn't mean we have evidence of it. It would make logical sense to me, yet it's not something that I can have evidence of, right? That I can point to and say, okay, this would say that, or this would indicate that. It's just my brain and the way my brain works. It says, oh, that makes logical sense, right? That doesn't necessarily mean, yeah. So it's a hypothetical, but it would make logical sense to me. When we're looking at those things, it really gives this indication, again, which we've talked about frequently, of just, the idea that we go back so much further than we think we do, right? We have this idea that we're so much of us is just this new thing. Somebody's arguing on my, I don't even know where it got to this, but I've got somebody who told me, well, you're talking like civilization's a bad thing. And it's like, well, your idea of civilization isn't a positive thing. Like what you think is civilized is killing us. So, but we have this idea that prior to our civilization of ourselves, everything is primitive and nobody understands the world. And that's just such a false speculation. That's just such a falsity, anyways, right? So it makes sense to me that so many things that 2 years ago, we didn't think Neanderthals buried themselves. 2 years ago, I was taught that there is some evidence that indicates Neanderthals could possibly be burying themselves, but the evidence is narrow. And that Krebs was not evidence because of the fact that we know that there are the fields below Shanidar Cave that the people who were excavating Shanidar Cave were walking through, and they had a lot of, or they were wearing wide leg, loose trousers, and they're walking through. So picking up the pollen that we're finding in Shanidar Cave was definitely an indication of the people that were excavating, not actually Krebs being buried. Well, the recent discovery in Shanidar Cave of another half of one of the finds that we have before that is associated with the flower burial. And we only have, like, I think part of the upper body of this being. We didn't think we had the lower body of this being, but now in the reopening, because they've reopened Shanidar Cave and they're digging in. And again, we see that Shanidar, or that they have the lower half of this person. And since archaeology has advanced, we're no longer using really stupid techniques. And we're no longer using just a bunch of volunteers. Most people have to actually, like, you know, have some time on a dig site to be involved in a dig site, or, be under supervision to be involved on a dig site if they don't have time on a dig site before. And you absolutely, they're going to do things like make sure that you don't wear the pants and things like that, right? So Princess Ukok, yeah, she's amazing. She's one of the ones that the tattooing on. I want would really like the reindeer on her. It's a really cool beast. Um, so when we're looking at that, we're understanding now that since there's the flower pollen in the grave, that we've advanced our techniques, so we know it's obvious that this is another flower burial. So this puts credence and gives weight to the flower burial that we see beforehand, which tells us that yes, Krebs was absolutely buried, and tells us that yes, there is absolute evidence of burial at 90,000 years ago. Last year, we didn't think nobody buried their dead, and now we know nobody buried their dead, and not only buried the dead, but they came back and they worshipped too, right? So as we're moving forward with these understandings and this idea, we can absolutely see that there are so many areas where we thought, no, that's not what's going on, and no, that's not what's happening. But the reality is, as we get more information, that yes, that's exactly what's happening, right? Um, Again, this just leads to, or just comes from our thought process that we're unique, and comes from our thought process that we, um, that superiority concept, like we have to be different, we have to be better, we have to be something new and something unusual, because otherwise, what the fuck, right? Like, why do we have the right to do all this shit if we're not something unusual, right? So, it really doubles down on that. It really gives us this understanding that so many things that we've understood about Neanderthals and so many things that we've understood about early sapiens is completely false. Pretty much everything that comes across over the last couple of years just really seems to tell us that everything we've assumed, because assuming makes an ass out of you and me anyways, right? Assumed about prior hominin species and about ourselves as early hominins is really just false anyways. And as we're learning that, as we're getting further in and doing better with it, um, we're really starting to see that so much stuff goes further back than we really thought. And that prior humans and Neanderthals and Homo sapien compared to Homo sapien, all of these different primitive groups aren't necessarily the primitive that we want to say they are, or that we want to think they are. And that we're looking at groups who really are living, in the comfort and of their time and not missing things, right? Absolutely. We're currently just talking about tattoos within Europe. Uh, Currently, we've discussed the fact that at 35,000 years ago, we are finding our first tattooing implements. Have not spoken about race. We haven't gotten to the concept of race yet. Concept of race is really a new concept, and it's been debunked, but we haven't gotten to it yet. We might not. It's a little bit less a part of today's thought process. Today, we're really more talking about tattooing in European cultures. And we see that the tattoo tools are definitely going back, 35,000 years. Again, this is in a cave at the south of France, right at the border, kind of within the Iberian Peninsula. And when we're looking at that, we can also see that the mummies across Eurasia are really showing up with tattoos as early as, Otzi at 4,000 years ago. We do see tattooing within, again, the Scythians. We see tattooing. We see that Otzi's descendants and ancestors, his maternal line actually dies out, but his maternal line starts in the Alps and was from the Alps that he was found in, but his paternal line comes from Sweden and Bulgaria. And so we see that this is that connection to a Scandinavian culture. We also see that this is that part of that movement that we're constantly seeing anyways. We have a mummy that we were talking about in a cave in China. Let me get the name of the cave again. These things are underneath the tattooing tab in biographies in my on my website. So there is the Tarim Basin uh, mummy in China, and the Tarim Basin mummy is between 1000 and 600 BCE, and she had her eyebrows are painted, which is kind of cool. She had charcoal and soot tattoos. They include moons on her eyelids, ovals on her forehead, and a decorative scroll pattern on her left hand and wrist. Um, Exceptionally long fingers. Her culture hasn't been identified, but the similarity of her tattoos of those of other mummies from Russia, for example, clearly identifies her as a part of the Eurasian tradition of tattooing that begins with Otzi in 5,000 years ago. So when we're looking at this, we're seeing that that tattooing tradition that begins with Otzi in the Alps does go into the Scythian people, does go into China. It does go across many different spaces, and we're seeing that the European, or not the Europeans, that the Romans actually document it in many different cultures. Where we talk about the Picts having tattoos from their forehead to their toes, uh, it kind of varies. It's usually in the morning that I go live. It does kind of vary. I'm trying to go live pretty much every day, except for a couple days on the weekends right now. But I'm trying to vary morning and evening because Pacific Standard Time, because I'm in Pacific Standard Time zone. I'm trying to vary morning and evening so that I'm getting a little bit of everybody, and I can uh, find a couple different spaces. I am trying to put up live events, but I don't always put them up. So I'll try and make sure that I do more of those so that people can actually see them. Uh, let's see. When we're seeing with the Roman documentation, we do see though that the Romans document absolutely all of the Celts. Because when you're talking about the Celts and the Gauls and the Picts and the Britons, Celts, Gauls, Picts, and Britons are all Celt groups, right? Like, so the Gauls and the Picts and the Britons are all Celts. They're just different nations of Celtic people, right? So when we're talking about the Celts, you're looking at the Celts all tattooing, right? Okay, I'll send that out, CP. But when I go live your time, or when I go live in the PM, it's like 8 p.m. my time, which is like 5 a.m. or 4 a.m. Not the Gales, the Gauls, specifically the Gauls, Gaul. And the Gauls are a Pictic or a Celtic group. Um, but they're like they divide out into the Celts and the Gauls. Like they start as they're all Celtoid to start, but then they divide down and then down and then down, right? Um, but this one I'm talking about the Gauls, not the Gaels, which is a totally, you're right, totally different things, right? The Gaels being the Britons really are Gaelic, are Gael, and Irish is a Gael, right? But this is specifically talking about the Gauls being groups in France and in Iberia. So uh, they are talking about pretty much all of the Celtic groups having tattooing. They do specify that the Picts, of course, and we've read and seen where they specify the Picts having it from scalp to toes, right? Uh, they do also specify really only with the Picts that I have personally seen what those tattoos are. That doesn't mean that it's not out there. It just means that I haven't read that much Roman history. But that they have specifications of those tattoos as being, flowers and birds and swirls and decorative elements. Um, I am by no means an expert on the decorative elements of Celts. I just am aware that we're using a lot more knotwork and a lot less straight line than we're seeing in Indigenous Turtle Island groups. Might have more straight line, right? Like the chin line in Indigenous Turtle Island groups, we don't see a straight chin line really we don't see a straight chin line really anywhere else. We might see like groups that have full chin tattoos. We might see groups that have a straight line with other things. Um, But even if I'm looking at tattooing of certain groups of Eurasia today that have, let me see if I've got what I'm looking for, chin tattoos, which there are like a couple of groups that do have some chin tattooing today. Where are my pictures of that? Let me see if I can find the correct pictures on that one. Uh, Even in those groups, to my recall, though, I'm not pulling up the pictures right now, so I'm not exactly sure on my recall, and I want to make sure. We're not seeing that there is a straight line, really. There's like designs on the chin. Um, or if there is a line, there seems to be other incorporations within that as well. So you might get a line with different designs on either side of it, as opposed to just a series of lines that we're seeing in Turtle Island Indigenous groups. So we're not seeing a lot of straight lines, and we're not seeing a lot of, let me see if I can find it. Nope, not today. I had it. I think it's on my phone and not on my computer. But we're not seeing a lot of straight lines in non. I'm doing the prior. So Britons as in Britons as in Britons as in the Romanic documentation of them. So Britons. So the Romanic documentation. So prior to the Romanic, or during the Romanic colonization of them, which again, they're going to be documenting them as Britons, but we're looking at, so the Britons, I believe, actually aren't in Britain. I think the Britons are actually, oh, it is, but it's a specific group within. Okay, that's what I initially thought. So what we're looking at is when they talk about the Britons in ancient language, what they're talking about is the people that diverge into the different groups that once we get to colonization kind of coalesce. Not that they weren't specific nations before, but they weren't nations that were kind of divided to my understanding. Like when we look at the documentation of when the Iceni and the different Celtic groups are ruling Rome, and Rome, sorry, yeah, I totally understand, sorry, and Rome is coming in. What we're looking at is, so you have many different groups of, first of all, you get like Celts are named because the Romans called them the Keltoi. Celt isn't necessarily the Celtic name. When you're moving into into Britain, the Romans document the Britons, Britons, and they document this as a Keltoi group. And in their documentation of the Keltoi group of the Britons, they pretty much look at everything in the southern half of England as the Britons, and everything, and England, Britain, and everything north of Hadrian's Wall as the Pictones, or the Picts, not the Pictones, they're on the Iberian Peninsula, but the Picts. And so they're looking at these as being two distinct groups, which they are absolutely two distinct groups. But they're looking at the entire bottom half as being a singular group instead of being distinct groups. So this is the, yeah, so this is the Roman verbiage for the entirety of the group of Celts on the lower half of Britain. It is not, it is encompassing all of them. So it is encompassing the Crummi, it's encompassing the Kiernock, It is encompassing all of those groups in the lower half. Encompasses the Iceni and things like that. Yes. But again, this is not the Romans doing the best, right? This is the Romans' verbiage and how they're documenting it. Kernowick. Yeah, sorry, I know I'm pronouncing it wrong, and I'm trying to picture in my mind enough to pronounce it. Thank you so much for that. Um, it's not who they thought themselves to be. It is not the overall that they think of themselves as. It is the Romans saying the Britons do this and taking the entire lower half of Britain as being Brighton and the upper half, the people they can't subdue, they think, or the people that they call really attribute to being savages. I really hate that terminology. Is the Picts, right? So they call this the Picts and this the Britons. So we know that this isn't the Britons. This is many different Celtic nations, right? And again, Celtic being not a, a word used by them either, right? But it's just them documenting pretty much everybody on the island of Britain as having tattooing culture. Um, and then documenting. So when you're looking at documenting the Gauls and the Celts, they're documenting them separately from Britain, or the Britons as they're documenting them, and the Picts. Then what you're looking at is them documenting not only all of the island of Britain, but also pretty much everything in Western Eurasia that they have deemed as not being Germanic as having tattooing, right? And that's basically all that's doing. That's just documenting that everything that they are coming in contact with has tattooing to some extent. Um, their verbiage and their naming is incorrect, right? Is colonizing, right? Is their colonizing stuff that we've talked about before. Um, so when we're looking at that, Romans are really documenting everybody, because if you're looking at them documenting, that pretty much includes all of their ideas of what Celtic groups exist, right? And again, they're naming who they think are Celts as Celts. These are not the names that these groups are usually attributing to themselves. We know that the Picts don't call themselves the Picts. The word Picts comes from the Roman because they're putting pictures all over their body, basically. And we know that the Picts, while being a distinct Celtic culture, are still part of that overall Celtic peoples, just like you might have Scandinavian culture, where several different countries are in Scandinavia, and each Scandinavian culture has a distinct Scandinavian culture, yet is overall underneath Scandinavian, right? Just the way we document migration and history. So when we're looking at this, we are seeing that they're documenting really everybody. We see that not only are they documenting everybody, we're seeing that Egypt is documenting themselves as having tattoos. There is fans, bowls, and uh, different artwork that documents Egypt as having tattooing. And that we see that in Asia, we're seeing that tattooing again, like with the Taran Basin mummy. And again, with this is something that we're seeing this that makes sense. That would make sense. Well, and I would think that, like, I think Caledonia is probably the Pictish word for one of their groups. And that's when Rome starts calling them Caledonians, right? Because they called them Picts and then started calling them Caledonians. Um, but when we're seeing this, we're seeing that this culture of tattooing really goes across, and that so if we're looking at a mummy in China and a mummy in the Alps having basically the same, well, not the Alps because Otzi's tattooing doesn't depict these things, but a mummy in China and a mummy in Russia, not Russia, but I guess it is Russia for the yeah, the Yukok mummy. when we're looking at that, we're seeing that the intricate tattoos of both are really similar. So seeing that shows that this is kind of moving across, right? And Siberia really kind of moves into a lot of you know, upper spaces of Asia, right? The Siberian steppes really go across the entire top of Eastern Eurasia, right? So we're seeing that this culture of tattooing is not just in one space; it really goes everywhere. We're seeing that different groups are tattooing for different reasons in written history when we're talking about it within written history. Um, and we're seeing that within these that some groups are tattooing as a rank, some groups are tattooing as a some groups are tattooing as a rank, as in tattooing all of the people who are of a low rank, and some groups are tattooing as a rank, as in tattooing people of high rank. Some groups are tattooing in a method that induces animal interaction or earth interaction, and some groups are tattooing to document their connection to gods, and some groups are tattooing to kind of embody different things. All of these groups tattooing are definitely taking from older styles that they as groups used. So if we're seeing this during Roman times, we're talking from roughly, I think, 500 or 800. Maybe, I think it's 500. I think it's 500. So roughly 500 BCE um, until, roughly 600 AD. Maybe it's 800. I can't remember. I think that the Greeks are 800 though. And uh, we're seeing that it goes further back, right? So it's going back into, Otzi at 5,000. So by the time that the Romans are documenting, it is going into different cultures in different ways, right? It is becoming different things in different cultures, whether it's gone from the medicine of Otzi to a spiritualistic endeavor for the Ukoic mummy, the Ukoic princess, to a symbol of rulership or a symbol of God connection, or it's gone from those things to a method of documenting slaves or criminals, right? We do see either way that it is definitely crossing pretty much all cultural bounds. When we're looking at this, though, it is very important to understand that certain tattoos have carried over and certain tattoos mean certain things. You don't want to tattoo a Chinese symbol on your body that you think means courage and in fact means idiot, right? Like, you want to make sure that when you're incorporating things onto your body, that when you're bringing energy in, that you're incorporating a good energy. When you're incorporating these energies, that you are incorporating a correct energy. I went and did OM for myself because I needed some spell work on my body. And I chose speak out and step up. I have step up on my ankle and I have speak out on my neck. And I chose these because for many reasons. One of them is there's a song that is done by a sister group called Rising Appalachia. Uh, and the chorus of it is step up, speak out, show up, get loud. Step up, speak out, show up, get loud. And through a time of a lot of pain and sorrow for me, this was something that I constantly was on repeat and constantly singing, right? It was something that brought me a great deal of strength. Um, there's also the fact that to me, I believe that we're all given talents. We all acquire talents. We all have things that are innate to us specifically that we bring forward. And I have known for a long time that one of the things that I'm really good at is verbal. One of the things that I always admired Caesar's oration skills, the fact that he was a great orator, a great speaker. And so one of the good things that I have is the ability to speak and the ability to speak well. And it's also one of the things that I've lost at different points in my life due to PTSD. Uh, I've had different points in my life where I just couldn't open my mouth for whatever reasons. And I also find that PTSD really affects my speech and the way that I speak. So if I have really bad PTSD, or if like my PTSD is hitting really bad, or I'm having a lot of like after surgery, or I'm in a lot of pain, then I'll lose my ability to speak very well because of the fact that it's such an important part of me, and it's how I communicate. It's how I am, right? So when we look at these things, uh, and I incorporate these things into my body, I want to incorporate things that have value and meaning to me, right? So I chose speak out. I chose to step up because for me, being a frontliner, for me, standing shield walls, for me, being a warrior has always been really important. It's not something I'm as good at now because of disability, but it's always been very important to me. So to be able to do that, to be able to step up and to stand for others and to defend others has always been of a high importance. And so that was something that I needed to also incorporate into who I was. And I decided that I wanted to do these in OM because I'm not very good at, I don't like writing on my body. It's not attractive to me. It's not comfortable for me. So I didn't want writing on my body. I didn't mind symbols as opposed to Western alphabet, but I didn't want Western alphabet on my body. And while I love runes, uh, a line of rune here doesn't work for me very well. It just doesn't visualize for me very well. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to go with OM. So to go with OM, I needed to first have the words translated into Gaelic. Um, I had to have them translated into something that was correct for OM, right? So uh, we're only now realizing that OM is kind of more of a broader Celtic language, written language, than just an Irish language. For there are still groups that will tell you that it's just Irish. It is not, but still groups that will tell you that it's just Irish. So I went with Irish Gaelic. Um, I had to find somebody that I trusted to translate for me, to give me the correct Irish Gaelic words. And then I had to find somebody that I trusted to translate the correct Irish Gaelic words into OM. And so I had to do that personally because I'm not going to be that person who has a Chinese word tattooed on them that they think means, courage, and instead it means idiot, right? Like I'm not going to tattoo something completely wrong on my body. I have to know what it is. So when we're looking at these things, it's important that we do that. It's important that I'm not bringing in the wrong energy. When you're marking your body permanently with something, that's something that you're drawing into your body in a permanent sense on all levels, right? Uh, it is something that you will carry with you forever, right? We can absolutely change that these days. You can absolutely get tattoos removed these days, right? But usually it is something that you carry with you forever. And even if they're removed, there are still the scars underneath, right? There is still the fact that they were there once. So when you're doing this, you are incorporating something into your being. So you need to understand what you are incorporating into your being. You need to know what you are incorporating into your being before you make that a part of your permanent being, right? So if you're looking at things to incorporate into your body, you should understand where it roots at and what it means. Now, not everybody believes that way. Do your own fucking thing. As long as you're not stealing from other people, right? As long as you're not taking from other people, right? So when we're looking at things like the chin tattoos that we see here in Turtle Island, we're looking at things that are very specific to specific cultures. They are about in the Polynesian Islands. Some of the first anthropological discussion on tattooing is done in the Polynesian Islands. And there's somebody in about the late 1800s who documents going in. And he's bringing in books of history with him. And when he's bringing these books of history with him, he's talking to the women. And he explains to them that this is the history of his people. And they explain to him that they wear the history of their people. So that what is on their skin is the history of their people. It's a really awesome book that shows this. It's journal, and it's a part of his journal, and it talks about how they actually like the women took the leaves out of the pages of his books that he gave them, and they made clothing out of them, and they wore them on their body because they believed in wearing their history on their body, right? And then the rain came and melted the pages of the journals, and they were like, well, our history doesn't melt, your history is dissolvable, there's something wrong with your history being so dissolvable, right? Our history is, permanent, it sticks, it stays. When you're looking at chin tattoos in Turtle Island, when you're looking at these specific things, these are history. This is family line. This is connection. This is oftentimes accomplishment or something done, right? Or induction into a group or different things like that, marking of identification for your part of acceptance within, right? So when you're taking things like that and you're incorporating them into your body, what you're doing is taking false valor and incorporating it into your body. What you're doing is taking a false history and incorporating it into your body. What you're doing is telling a group that you belong to it that hasn't accepted you into it, right? And that you don't belong to on any levels. So it's not an appropriate thing. For me, it makes logic doubly so when we look at this and understand that tattooing like this has a connection to ancestry. And if you are connecting to the wrong people, you are getting the wrong results, right? Again, if you are tattooing something on your body and you think it means one thing and it means something else, you're bringing the wrong energy, the wrong permanence. Um, if you were to go out, we see people who go out and decide to tattoo a pentagram on their body and come back with the Star of David, right? This is a perfect example of thinking that you're incorporating one thought process that you firmly, fully believe in, and instead incorporating somebody else's thought process that you have no idea of, right? This isn't appropriate. Not only is it isn't appropriate, like with your interaction for other people, but how do you feel when you realize that you have tattooed stupid on your body instead of courage on your body, right? How do you feel when you realize that you have tattooed the Star of David on your body instead of a pentagram, right? You're trying to incorporate maybe some paganism into your body, and instead you're incorporating Yahweh, like the root of it, right? Like, how do you feel when you're looking at that and going, well, I just tattooed the absolute wrong thing on my body, and now I have to carry this for the rest of my fucking life, right? Not only is it something that's inappropriate, not only is it something that's stealing valor, or not only is it something that is taking from others when you should not, but it is also internally something that you won't, like the internal consequences are very generally and often very difficult, right? Uh, and so there's a lot of reasons why not. Uh, we've talked a few times about the different kinds of differences that we're seeing. And I think that these are really important. When we look at these differences, we're really seeing that uh, when you look at European tattoo history incorporates the world around it. And it incorporates a lot of knot work, a lot of braiding, right? When you see any European art well, let me go with Northwest European art, you're seeing a lot of knot work, right? You're seeing a lot of braiding. You're seeing a lot of intertwine. Intertwining is huge, right? Uh, the Triskel was brought up. The the original Trinity, the Mother, Maiden, and Crone, right? And Triskelion is another word that it's called, but the triple, right? Um, this is something that you can see through most of Northwest European culture. You can see that the leaf-shaped three-point triskel or Triskelion is seen very much in a lot of Celtic knotwork spaces. You can see that there is a triskel done in horns and a triskel done in triangles in Nordic culture, right? Triquetra or triquetra are two other words for it. But all of these are a tri. All of these are a three-way. And really what it is in many cultures, you don't see a duality, you see a triple, right? You see the mother, maiden, and crone. You see the uh, the the infant, the warrior, and the old man. Uh, you see the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. You see this. Okay, yeah, and the 3 point swirl, and it's incorporated in so many different ways where you see this. I don't like using the word Trinity because that's appropriated by Christianity, but where there is this tri faith, this tri um, connection, right? And this understanding is very important. That understanding of the way it plays out is very important. Some places look at it as the life, death, and rebirth, right? So it plays out in many different cultures. We see, you can trace some of the different things all the way down, just like you can trace language all the way down into the northern part of India, right? Because you're looking at the Celtic Indo-European, or the Indo-European people coming from there and coming over, right? Um, and three is huge. Three is huge in a lot of space. Three is a major for me. The number three, the power of three is huge. I do everything in threes and nines. The book will be 21 pages, right? I think the last book was 21 pages as well, right? Three times seven. Seven is also another huge one. Um, but in many different cultures, actually, that triple is and it is almost always about that in between, right? It is almost always that acknowledgement that there is, that even between birth and death there's life, right? When you're looking at the maiden and the mother and the crone, what you're looking at is birth, life, death, right? and and when you're looking at the newborn son and the warrior and the elder, what you're looking at is birth, life, death, right? Um, what you're looking at is the transition from one space in between another space, right? And that's so important in so many cultures, very much so in Celtic culture, very much so in Nordic culture, but still so important in many cultures. Personally, my favorite space is the sea, because at the edge of the sea is it's nothing like being at the sea, at the edge on the beach as twilight is happening, or as the sun is rising, having that convergence of as many different in between spaces as possible, because when you can converge all of those in between spaces, many people believe it gives you that connection to the other side. For many groups of people, there is this lifting of the veil. There is this belief that there is another side and that we can communicate with the other side. We just have to hit that point where the veil is lifted, or we have to find the space to spread the veil. This is the origin of Samhain. Like, this is what Halloween is the veil is thin on this day and we can get to the other side so easy. It's an in between because it is the new year, right? So we see that it is extremely important um, in this understanding of one's own ancestry and roots when one is looking at their Celtic or their Nordic or their Northwestern European ancestry, right? Really, it is very relevant with that understanding of binary and the disproving of binary, right? In the fact that we do have more than two gender or two biological sexes. Wind Warrior, which is also known as Kamikaze. That makes total sense. Um, but we see within this that it is one of those ways that bringing that forward is important, right? When you're looking at different symbolism to use, a lot of times you can look at, so I wouldn't just look at ancient artwork and go, okay, I'm going to toss that on my body, right? And the reason I wouldn't just look at ancient artwork and go, okay, I'm going to toss that on my body is because you don't really know what the meaning of it is. So you could again be tossing coward on your body when you're trying to toss brave on your body, right? So you want to connect with groups and space that have the understanding still of what those things might mean. And this happens very frequently when you can see that there is this translation down through time with language of understanding of things. Like, so if you can look at things like Widda and see that Widda it's the oldest etymology of the word witch. It translates down to witch, but what it means is wid is knowledge, like Drew wid is knowledge, and da is the feminine. So we know that da is an ancient feminine, right? So we might see that vulvas that we are putting on, you know, carved into stone, that might be connected to da, right? That might be that ancient feminine, right? So if we can look at different things and speak to different groups who are able to understand that, or look at different archaeologies and histories, personally for me is where I go, just because I feel like I find more accurate information on there. Hey, Saturn. And so if I can look at, so Widda is before that. So Widda, the origins of the word are in Proto-Indo-European. So Peter Beresford Ellis talks in his book about how you can trace Indo-European from the top of India to Ireland. And so when we look at Indo-European, what we're looking at is oh, and I don't know where they've timelined all these out, but I'm just going to give random dates. So say Indo-European starts at 5,000 years ago. Proto-Indo-European is before 5,000 years ago. So when we're looking at proto, what we're looking at is the pre of the language. So when we're looking at Indo-European, we do see that it does trace from India itself over. Though we see that Indo-European traces over, we also see that Finno-Ugaric traces over as well. And Finno-Ugaric comes from the steppes, and it has a proto as well. But they both, like Finno-Ugaric and Indo-European, both trace back to a proto together. And I'm not sure off the top of my head. I can't remember exactly what the proto of them both is, like the way they proto together. They might be proto, I can't remember what the name is for it, but they trace back, right? So, and we see that. We see, like, if it was going to be something that was pronounced through Cymric, that it would be with the, right? When we're looking at the proto, though, and where he's pulling it from, we see that it is the D that's pronounced. So when we look at wid as knowledge, we see the D within that. And when we look at da as knowledge, we see the D within that. And so the pronunciation of those two verbiages putting together isn't going to change so much in the pronunciation when they're put together. To my understanding from the book, which is also something that I haven't actually read for the last 20 years. Like, I read it completely 20 years ago. It was given to me as a gift, and I haven't, as a wedding present, and I haven't had it since the divorce. That was the first wedding. So I guess it's 25 years ago. And I know it's that book, and I've studied him under a couple of other things. I just haven't studied this book again in depth, just because I need to get a hold of it, and books are expensive as fuck. There's a couple I really want to get a hold of. This is on my list of I need to buy. So when we're looking at it, they're tracing it back before. So when you get to the point that the Cymric, and I'm going to say Cornish because I know that's incorrect, but I don't remember if I'm pronouncing the other one correct, and I don't want to mispronounce it. And the Picts, or the descendants of Scotia, or the Irish, What we're looking at is later adoptions when are getting to space and staying in space and kind of isolating in space, right? So I think we've talked before about how a lot of times you can look to, as we're bringing back some of these languages that have been gone for almost 1,000 years in some spaces. Kiernuic, thank you. Um, when we're looking at those, though I may be pronouncing that wrong because remember, your idea of phonetic and my idea of phonetic are two different things. Just say it, just say it. But when we're looking at that, we're seeing that as the Kumri are isolating because of colonialism, their language is changing. And as the Canuic are isolating good, their language is changing, right? And as the Irish are isolating, their language is changing, right? And so, what are the adaptations today aren't necessarily the adaptations or the original way it's going. Um, and so I just when I'm looking at it and the way I pronunciate it, for the way I pronounce it, I just go with my basis understanding of what it was, right? Right. just phonetic to the Welsh alphabet. Uh, well, and that's real too, right? And again, that comes with colonialism, like trying to make sure that you're adapting within, right? And English is such a Germanic based language. Like it has so many other languages in it, but its roots are so Germanic, right? So you get that both Germanic and Celtic languages are are Indo-European languages. They both come out of Indo-European. Yet by the time we get to say German and Irish Gaelic, we're looking at two completely different languages, right? Right. Um, because they root again, like their branch goes further back. And that's really where it is how far back does it branch off from the original, right? How far back does the split happen, right? Um, and when we look at like English, it's really so many of the Germanic languages kind of bastardized together, and then a bring in is some of the other languages. Um, but when we're looking at tattooing and bringing this in, what we need to look at is that you can take things back in language. You can take things back an understanding of groups that are still working very hard to maintain sovereignty, overthrow colonialism, bring back ancestral thought process. And you can also look into archaeology and anthropology. I encourage people looking into archaeology and anthropology to understand that your take on it and the archaeologist's take on it might not be from an animistic standpoint. So, um, again, we get with things like, somebody identifies this as an atlatl when for, the two loops on the side of a shaft as an atlatl, whereas for, 100 years, people have been going, oh, that must be decorative. I can't think of any other reason that they would do that, right? So I would encourage that as you're looking at things, if you are using Western thought to find them, that in that using of Western thought, if it says it's this purpose, see how many different purposes you can come up with for it, right? Or maybe go to an indigenous person from another group. If we're looking at something that doesn't have an indigenous descendant group in the area, right? So if we're looking at, say, the middle of France, okay? I don't think the middle of France really has a lot of indigenous descendant groups in the area. I could be wrong. If I am and anybody knows, please correct me. Uh, say we're looking at the middle of France and we don't have an indigenous group in the area, but say we are finding standing stones. And on those standing stones, we're seeing uh, different swirls, or on those standing stones, we're seeing animal artwork. Okay. Um, and we don't have an indigenous descendant group there that can, take a look at this and say, oh, that's what this was, right? And looking at it through a Western lens, We're not going to be able to understand exactly what it was. We're going to understand what we think through Western thought process. And that's not going to give you the animistic or the indigenous thought process. You could go to, both Celtic indigenous groups that are still there, or Nordic indigenous groups that are still there, or Scandinavian indigenous groups that are still there, right? So maybe it's in the middle of France, so you're not quite sure, is this something that's Celtic or is this something that's Germanic in descent, right? So you can go personally yourself, go, well, if I am to talk to somebody who is Sami, uh, they're the reindeer in Russian, like if I'm going to talk to somebody who might have connection to this, maybe I'll go to the Sami and talk to the Sami about, how would you relate this? What would that give you as an impression? This is, might be something that is connected to you, but it's in a completely different area. So it might be further back connected to you, or, uh, but your indigenous thought process on it. What would this say to you? What would this speak to you? Right. And then you might also go, well, that's really swirly, and it really looks like a lot of the Celtic stuff that comes down further, so maybe I'm going to also go to the Celtic groups and go, it looks like this to me, and somebody else said maybe this, but what do you think? What does it speak to you as? What does it call forth to you? And you might see that, like, the Celtic group looks at it and goes, well, that is uh, fantasy. That is God related in my mind. That's a spiritual God related, because we don't have those beasts, right? Whereas if you're talking to somebody who is Sami, and this is a reindeer style, right? They're going to go, well, that's power or wealth, maybe. And I'm not saying that the Sami associate reindeer with power and wealth. I do not know how the Sami would associate that. I do know that for the Sami, this is they herd reindeer. This is something that's very important within their culture and a very huge part of their culture, right? So they might see that tattooing it in this space is an indicator that you have this many reindeer and therefore you have wealth, right? Or an indicator that you ride reindeer and so you have. So you're going to see that these two different groups might take this in two different ways, right? Now, if you are looking at something and your ancestry comes from the middle of France, middle of Russia, some space that you don't see an indigenous group connected to at this point of time, that all the indigenous groups have died out in this point of time, and you're taking it further back to the Ukok princess, right? Or to Standing Stones. Um, you're looking at this, and maybe, you know, when you're studying it, maybe when you're looking at it, maybe when you're talking to these two different groups, something rings truer to you, something sticks to you, right? Maybe you know that your group was in Middle France, and so this applies to you from Middle France, but you also know that they had a tendency to travel down. So this might speak to you that they're more Celtic. And therefore, you're going to associate it more with the Celtic thought process than you might with the Sami thought process, right? So these are different ways that you can take a symbol that is unknown, and pull it out of the Western lens and get an idea of what it might look like in a non-Western lens. Again, you want to be careful within these kind of things that you are neither appropriating somebody else's culture, applying something in a false way. So if I am going to use Princess Ukok, right? Siberian mountains. I personally know that the Siberian steppes is where we kind of believe that the Finno-Ugric people are coming over from. And when we look at Scandinavia being settled at 7,000 years ago, we're looking at our 7,000 BCE, 7,000 years ago. So anyways, when we see Scandinavia being settled, we're seeing Scandinavia being settled by a dark-skinned, light-eyed group coming up from the south, and a light-skinned, dark-eyed group coming over from the east. So this light-skinned, dark-eyed group coming over from the east, I believe, really translates down to the Sami and the Finnish people in the space. I don't think Finnish is the correct pronunciation of. of what the Finnic people call themselves. And I don't think Finnic is that either, but the Finn people in Finland and in this space, right? So we can see where that translation of movement is happening, right? Yet, if I were to decide, okay, so the reindeer on her body to me means this because as I'm talking to these two different groups, this one rang truer. And I also know that it looks like DNA wise and evidence wise that her group of people are going over and up into the Sami people. So therefore, the Sami probably have a closer understanding to this. So maybe I'm going to go with the Sami thought process on this. Maybe I'm doing this to connect to ancestry that I know of from the Russian steppes, from Siberia. Uh, I know that uh, there is that shared culture that translates over. I am still not going to, first of all, I'm using something that is from that area that I'm finding in that area. So I know it is from that area. Okay. Well, I might take it to I'm using it as a source of drawing in the power of the reindeer. Reindeer are very like a big old elk or a big old moose. You don't want to screw with that shit, right? So like drawing in the power of the reindeer, I'm going to use this as a power embodiment, right? I am going to not sit there and go, well, I'm doing that because the Sami told me to do that, right? I'm not going to sit there and equate it to the Sami life because I am not equating myself to the Sami life and I'm not equating myself to the Sami thought process and I'm not equating myself to the Sami people. I am equating myself to the Siberian ancestry, right? I am using the reindeer from the Siberian ancestry. I don't, I do, but I mean, I know that I have Sami ancestry, but maybe I don't know that I have Sami ancestry, right? So I'm not going to bring the Sami people into what I am decorating on my body. I'm going to bring the indigenous understanding that they gifted me with, an understanding of, and take it in the way that I relate to. And I'm doing this to honor my Siberian ancestry, right? I'm not going to sit there and go, well, I'm doing this because I'm Sami, or I'm doing this because the Sami told me to, right? This is where we get taking something and actually appropriating it. Right? If we are going to go to groups to try and get a different understanding, we still have to incorporate our own understanding unless we are trying to become a part of that group, i.e., we have ancestry in a group and we are reconnecting. So if I do not have ancestry to a group and I'm not reconnecting to that group, well, I can understand indigeneity better through their eyes. I am not taking their indigeneity to my indigeneity. I am not deciding that my indigeneity is Sami indigeneity, as in, like, I'm going to, if the Sami believe that there is that herd, like I wear a reindeer because that to me is embodying the power of the reindeer and the fact that I own many, right? And again, this is not something that I understand the Sami to understand. I'm just off the cuff, right? And I am taking it, well, okay, I can understand that embodying of the power and the having of the herd. I'm trying to embody power to self-confidence, right? So, so I'm not going to call it what the Sami call it. I'm not going to embody it in the way that the Sami embody it. I'm going to take the understanding and bring my own understanding to the forefront. This is about embodying. I'm going to embody in this way, right? Um, but I'm not necessarily embodying the same things. This is where we are able to learn from those who are still here without monolithing everything, without turning everything into the same, right? And without deciding that one culture is the exact same as another culture, right? Um, because we have to find a way to understand our own indigeneity in space where we don't have ancestors still, our people still left, right? In the spaces that have been colonized for so long that that thought process, excuse me, has been lost by most of the people. You have to find a way to incorporate it without using the Western lens, but without stealing somebody else's ideas, right? And this is a way that you can do it. And the reason that I'm describing that is because I want you to understand fully and completely that when you're doing that, you cannot take exactly what somebody says and translate it as your indigenous culture, right? Like, because I don't want you to go out and decide, well, somebody said that this is this, so it must be this in this culture too, right? Somebody said that the reindeer means this for them, so it must mean that for every culture, because that again is looking at things through a Western lens, right? You have to. So, an indigenous lens encompasses the world around it, and a Western lens is narrower. An indigenous lens looks as a broader swath. It looks at the whole world as mattering, whereas an indigenous or a Western lens only looks at a narrow swath as mattering, right? So when you're looking at it through that indigenous lens, if you are still looking at it narrowly, if you're taking an indigenous standpoint and looking at it narrowly, then you're still encompassing that Western thought process. Which groups are you talking about, Monty? So if we've traced everybody far enough back, we all come from the same place. By the time we get to Indo-European, Proto-Indo-European, I think might be 7,000 years ago. It's Proto-Indo-European, and then Indo-European is 5,000 years ago to like 2,000 years ago, or a little bit further back, or something like that. Um, when we get far enough back, though, they're pretty inter. They're think of a group of 300 people. That group of 300 people all shares the same language, all shares the same culture. As that group of 300 people grows, the lands can't support it anymore. So it starts to move out. It starts to move to different space. And as it carries that culture and that language into different space, carrying that culture uh, into different space, uh, and that language into different space, after they've been in those different spaces for periods of time, those languages start to become unique. We initially think of them as dialects. Uh, you know, uh, we see it with English, actually. We see English, and American English, right? So when you see this movement out, you're seeing that first dialects start to form and then languages start to form. And so you see that if you start with, a group and that 300 people, a couple hundred of them stay, and then a couple hundred of them go here and a couple hundred of them go there. Maybe you have a couple hundred go up and become Germanic and a couple hundred go down and become Celtic as they're moving across Eurasia to the west. Um, as they're leaving, they're taking the same language as they leave, but as they don't really isolate because we don't see isolation, but as they're like settling into space, they're developing language around space. Um, they're adapting space to them. They're adapting to space. You're seeing that language turns into dialects, and then it turns into distinct languages. So you see that. Trying to think of a way to. You see that the language of everybody at this point is Indo or Proto-Indo-European, depending on the timeline. That's probably at that point Proto-Indo-European. So it starts as Proto-Indo-European when you're there 300 people, and as you're moving out, now you get. Say you've got, your group moving over this way to the west, and your group moving over this way to your west, and you got another group moving over this way to your east. Well, this group moving over to your east stays Indo-European, or this group starts to kind of diverge, whereas these two groups here stay Indo-European. Um, Again, Proto-Indo-European is here. Now we have Indo-European, and maybe we have Finno-Ugric over here. And I don't think that Finno-Ugric comes from Proto-European. I just, trying to do another one. So now you have the Indo-European moving over here, and the Indo-European starts to branch out, coming into the Germanic language group and coming into the Celtic language group. And then maybe coming into the Italic language group, because I think that's actually as distinct between the two, or from the two, anyways. So you're seeing that as it's branching out, it's becoming more language groups. And then as it branches out further, it becomes more language groups. And really, it's just becoming regional dialects. And then those regional dialects adjust and adjust and adjust. Language is constantly adjusting, constantly adjusting. People get all up in arms. I've been told, well, that's not a real word before. And I'm like, nothing's a real word. What are you talking about? Like, we're all made up. Like, it's all made up. It's all something somebody made up somewhere, right? Um, so when you're looking at it, you're seeing that that outward movement is really kind of giving, and again, you're not really seeing isolation. What you're seeing is there's still that constant flux and the constant movement. You might see that it narrows down a little bit in certain spaces after a period of time, right? So once you get to the idea that people have and possess space, you start to see people occupying space a little bit more. So you might see that the Germanic language group really encompasses, and you do that, it really encompasses pretty much everything from like I think the Siberian steppes over in the northern half of Eurasia. It's all Germanic group language based. And if you look uh, in the lower half, you see that now in the lower half, it is all Italic based languages. Uh, and this is because the Italians took over that entire region, right? And you do see pockets where you get things like Celtic languages still exist, Basque still exists, right? But you see that there is this control of area, and where this control of area happens, you start to see languages really start to solidify even more and more into distinct languages. Uh, because you're seeing that, well, the entire upper part is Germanic and they're constantly moving in those Germanic regions. You're also seeing that you're not getting the Germanic regions moving as much with the Latin regions at this, at like say 500 BCE to 500 CE, when, you know, the Romans are trying to kill the Germanic groups, right? So when you see that, you're seeing that it's not that people are not moving, and there are still people going up and down, but you're seeing that people are starting to become firmer nations, I guess would be the better way to put it, or firmer uh, groups, right? Distinct groups in some manners. You do still see, like I said, a lot of that translation, a lot of that movement. You just see a lot of this kind of my language and my culture defines me. You start to see this my language and my culture defines me coming into play. Um, I think that we do see that there is some connection between the Scots and the Basque. We do see that the Picts and the Pictones, the Pictones are in the Basque region. And we also see that the Y DNA that comes over from Turkey that is associated with the Pict man in Scotland at I want to say 10,000 years ago, but I can't remember if he's 10,000 years ago or 8,000 years ago across the top of my head. But there's a Pict uh, find in Scotland, an archaeological find, and the DNA on him, his Y DNA comes. Well, we say it comes from Turkey because at the top of Turkey you find the densest amount of that Y DNA currently. And so, if we find the densest amount of that Y DNA currently in a space, we believe that is the origin of that DNA. So we see that it comes out and it pauses in the Iberian Peninsula, at the top part of the Iberian Peninsula. And then, you see that some of that Y DNA is there, and then you see that the Y DNA is up among the Picts. And so that would tell us that the Picts are coming over from Turkey, stopping in the Iberian Peninsula, and then going up, which is, as the Irish legends tell us, and as most of the legends tell us. And that to me would give the ability for them to mix with the Basque. The Basque, though, I do know are also they're a very unique group that's not seen anywhere else. And what it is, not anywhere else, but anywhere else in that region. And what it is they believe what happened is, when we're talking about that constant movement, that as everybody's moving over from the steppes and coming across into Europe, like 30 to, or I think the newest finds are like 50. So 50,000 years ago on, when we're seeing that movement over, and those are finds way down low, or maybe they're, oh, I can't remember exactly where that new find is. We're going to go with 40,000 years ago. When we see that movement over 40,000 years ago, and we see that going up, what we're seeing is that one of those earlier groups kind of isolates. And that earlier group, they believe that the group of the Basque people coming over, I believe, is like 15 or 20,000 years ago. Like, they believe that the original Basque get there around 20,000 years ago currently, and that as all of the other groups are doing this, the Basques stay right here. And as all of these other groups are moving around and interconnecting and interchanging, and as the Romans are coming in and trying to wipe people out, the Basques stay right here. And as the Basques stay right here, nobody's doing this. It's this, and there's got to be a little bit of DNA coming in. There has to be, because of the fact that we do not see them becoming inbred. We do not see them speciating. We see there is some caused by that lack of genetic diversity. There are actual, so I first heard about the Basque when I was like 22, and I had a friend who was Basque, and she was like first generation born here. Her father was Basque from Basque. And she told me that, and I'm not exactly sure, but she told me that many Basque will have extra rib bone. And she said that many Basque will have thicker bones and a thicker skull. Um, I haven't done a whole lot of study genetically on Basques, or as an academic or as a scientist on Basque. I never had a feel to a need to. I have seen a few things come across when I was doing things like RH negative, when people were asking about that. Um, we do not see a higher presence of RH negative in the Basque people. We have three populations. We see roughly 19%, which is the highest percentage of RH negative. And those three populations are in different portions of the globe completely, right? But that's awesome. But we do see that there are some genetic differences within the Basque, because of the fact that they have been in isolation. So they've been in isolation, but not complete isolation. So the thought process is they're coming over, and I don't remember the exact time, but I believe it was roughly 20,000 years ago. I believe it's roughly when we're looking at the Solutreans and the Aletians and the Gravatians, and after that. So, or maybe right after that. But we're looking at them coming over, with this initial group coming over, and where this initial group is constantly moving, they don't have a need to. So where the Basque region is, I mean, even when we have the last ice age, that Basque region is still pretty temperate, right? It's still a zone that you can really see. So even in that minor kind of little ice age, if they had come over, towards the end of that, when we look at humanity, or not humanity, sapien moving into Western Eurasia, even then they're going to be able to stay in that even through the harder times and stuff like that, because of the fact that it's a very temperate region no matter what. And so, you're looking at a group of people who are geographically pretty isolated. So you're seeing different groups moving around earlier on that are kind of interacting with them, to my memory of what I've read on it. But later, it gets more and more isolated. And that's where you start to see. Now, occasionally you'll have somebody come in, occasionally you'll have a traveler come in, and this is going to introduce new genetics. But you're not seeing the vast interchange that you see everywhere else on the globe. And so, um, when we're looking at that, we see that this is definitely that, how you take a group of people and really make them unique, right? And how you see this kind of effective isolation, and can see where we've actually had a constant movement because of the effective isolation. And you can also see where the Basque, like, we can trace their genetics back to our genetics. We all have, we can see where we're all like migrating out as one group, right? Or with the rest of Western European culture or peoples. But we can see that there's so much interjection of that back and forth within other Western European groups that the Basque don't get. Um, I wonder if there's a history of tattooing in the Basque. It makes sense to me because the mountain or the range, they're the same mountain range that they're finding the cave in, that they're finding the oldest tattooing implements. So it makes sense that there would be some tattooing among the initial groups coming into that region, right? So it would make sense to me. But when we're looking globally, you absolutely see that this presence of um, looking at things through a very indigenous lens is that kind of broader biome lens as opposed to the singular lane lens, and that you can look at different styles around Western European styles that incorporate and differentiate as time goes on, and that you absolutely see tattooing in all Western European cultures. Well, not all, but the majority of Western European cultures, you see tattooing, and you do not see it as you do not see it all as the same thing and for meaning the same reasons, but it's pretty much everywhere. How can I mix science and spirits? I think science explains spirituality. I think magic was science. And the reason that I think science and spirit is easily mixed is because science explains every creation story, and every creation story explains science. At least every creation story that I personally have heard to this point. And I've heard quite a few. Almost all creation stories talk about being created out of the earth, and almost all creation stories or coming from somewhere else. And almost all creation stories talk about there being others at the time of creation. When we're looking at creation stories, almost all of them seem to center around singular or small groups of people, either coming out of the earth or coming from somewhere else. Those coming out of the earth and coming from somewhere else all still seem to equate it as a home to come from, right? That there was this home that we were in, whether it's the earth itself, that is the home that we're coming out of and being incorporated into, or whether it is falling from the sky or coming across the water. So when you're looking at the creation stories and you're looking at science, you can absolutely see that really we are created out of the earth, really, because we're a part of the biome. We speciate in a space, and we speciate to be a part of that space, to tend in that space, like our ancestors tended in that space to be a part of that space. We speciate. Currently, we know from many different groups of human, but not in those different groups of human, we're initially a few, and then we become more. And those different groups of human are always intermixing, right? And always intertwining, right? And so if those different groups of human, Heidelbergensis, Ergaster, Rudolfensis, Erectus, are constantly intertwining, that constant intertwining that creates us also intertwines us at the same time. And we currently know that as we are coming from the earth, being created, being speciated in a space, right? We see that even our oldest stories talk about there being other humans on the planet. And so we see that as we're coming to being here, not only are there several other species of humans that we're coming from together, converging, but we know that there are other species of humans who are already outside of that area as well. not only others of these groups, like other Heidelbergensis that you're finding maybe in North Africa at this point in time, uh, but also Neanderthal, Naladi, which we do not think that is a part of us now because the morphological differences, because they are pretty morphologically different from us. So, or at least that the latest evidence is stating that they don't think, or the people compiling it are stating that they don't think that we could have mixed with things that are species that were so morphologically different, like Naladi. So, when we're looking at those things, we're seeing that that presence of Neanderthal, presence of Naladi, presence of Denisovian, presence of other groups actually gives weight to the origin stories that talk about being created and there being other groups of humans at the time. Um, Even if you look at the biblical creation story, the biblical creation story has other groups of humans that the sons and daughters of Adam are marrying into, because sons and daughters of Adam are not marrying each other, right? I've studied this science in very many places, Marcia. I've got a couple of degrees. Currently, I'm talking about recent articles and recent discoveries within my field of archaeology and anthropology. Um, so, uh, when we're looking at that, we're seeing that depending on where you are on the planet, if your creation story talks about coming from the sky or coming from the water, you see that this is truth. So many creation stories in spaces that are not Africa talk about, or they bring up a different creation. It's no longer coming out of the ground, but there are still coming out of the ground in many spaces. There are other spaces where coming out of the ground is not the creation story. And in the spaces that coming out of the ground is not the creation story, we see that there's instead, there are some creation stories that are boat stories, having come to a space on a boat. There are some creation stories that are based on falling from the sky. There are some creation stories that talk about coming out of mounds or coming out of caves or coming out of the ground. So when we're looking at human migration, we're currently understanding that there is the northern kelp route to the Turtle Islands, and there is the southern South Pacific boat route to the Turtle Islands. So there are two creation story boat routes that are being proven in science currently. Anything out of the ground, anything out of the earth can really be carried back to the initial thought process of creation, speciating in a space. There is also creation stories in the Turtle Island, creation stories in Abya Yala, where we see coming out of the ground. We now know with the Ceruti Mastodon find and with our understanding of the way that Homo erectus spreads and speciates, that it's quite possible that there is a speciation of Homo erectus. In fact, that's really what the Ceruti Mastodon find will tell us, is that there's a speciation of Homo erectus here in the Turtle Islands, because that is too far back to be sapien not having come out at this time. So in looking at that, we see a ghost species in Turtle Island indigenous people that would equate to that as well. And this would be a species that had speciated here, with Homo erectus making it here like they make it to so many different spaces, like to Florensis and to Luzonensis. So this would be putting weight to the indigenous Turtle Island stories that talk about being created here or speciating here, because when sapien gets here, we see that they envelop that species within them. Again, we see that ghost species in sapien DNA. So that gives weight to those stories here in the Turtle Islands that talk about being created here in the Turtle Islands, and gives scientific proof to those. It also gives scientific proof to the boat route. The sky route, the falling from the sky, can be taken in a couple of different ways. Often I've seen that any falling from the sky, there's a world there that is ejected from, and that world has trees, that world has other things within it. So there is a presence there. And so this can be coming from the roof of the world. and having to leave the roof of the world, right? This could be coming from an extremely northern region and having to leave that extreme northern region. Oftentimes, it's falling into water and then building the land. So, this could absolutely be correlated with boat routes, but maybe there's a boat that is providing everything, and something happens to the boat, and so we're ejected from the boat and taking with us the seeds of the tree that is there, right? So there are different ways that that can incorporate. Sky root's not as a direct correlation, just because of the fact that we're not seeing alien DNA in terrestrials. Like everything terrestrial really shares a lot of the same DNA. But really, every creation story talks about coming from something, speciating, um, and all talk about having other humans, right? Other people there at the time. So we absolutely see that within. Uh, I have like 15 minutes left and I'm leaving. I have an appointment. But we absolutely see that within creation stories across the globe. We absolutely see where you can correlate the science to the creation stories across the globe. Um, that's not all the creation stories. I believe that there's other creation stories. All of them seem to follow. Some of them talk about, coming from a tree, or like, the branches of a world tree. World tree is pretty cross cultural. That's one of the things that really seems to be everywhere. Um, Still, all of those talk about the world itself, and understanding the world itself and coming from the world itself, which is really about speciation. Because speciation is really just the biome creating us to fit a niche, right? That's what speciation is with everything, is the biome creating species to fit a niche, to fill a hole, to do something that needs to be done. Our niche, the things that we're supposed to be doing, is tending to care for the other things. We're given this great skill of adapting our adaptations, this great skill of nurturing, and this great skill of community. These are things that are very innate within us and very unique within us. Um, and these things are created within us so that we will tend, so that we will care for the environment, so we will take care of each other, so that we will take care of each other as a global each other, not just as a human each other. So the animals and the plants and the trees and the land. That's the niche that we fill. And all scientific correlation, or not scientific, or all scientific evidence points to truth in all creation stories. And you can really see that each creation story, uh, when you relate it to science and when you look at the science within it, you're absolutely getting this correlation, and finding evidence that supports the truth of it. So that's how I can relate science to creation stories. Before I go, let's talk really quick about appropriation versus appreciation. Uh, if somebody makes and is selling indigenous earrings, if somebody who is indigenous is making and selling indigenous earrings, and you buy indigenous earrings and you wear indigenous earrings, you are appreciating the culture. Um, if somebody makes indigenous earrings and you buy the indigenous earrings and you study those indigenous earrings and you make indigenous inspired jewelry and you start selling indigenous inspired jewelry, you are appropriating a culture. It's important that we buy things from small creators. It's important that we, buy things from indigenous people when they're indigenous things, and we buy things from Black people when they're Black things, and we buy things from uh, Rami people when it's Rami things, or different groups that we're buying from those different groups. I have a really beautiful pair of peacock feather slippers that I bought from somebody from India that are Indian slippers. I wear them. I love them. They're great. They're comfortable. Absolutely, I won't. It's at 2 o'clock, so I'm watching my time, I swear. When we're looking at that, we absolutely see that this appreciation of culture funds culture. This appreciation of culture uplifts culture. When you're buying indigenous things from indigenous people, what you're doing is giving people the ability to feed their families. You're giving people the ability to, you know, continue their life, to live, right? Um, don't take that as a yay me savior. That's not what it is. But it is absolutely, I hate using the word bond. It's just so, don't take that as your white savior. Don't take that as you're saving anybody. It is absolutely you getting something in return. It's not like you're saving nobody, but it is absolutely supporting. It is absolutely uplifting. It is absolutely contributing to their ability to grow. Please go and buy lots of indigenous jewelry, lots of black jewelry, lots of, black owned items and indigenous owned items, lots of Iranian stuff, lots of Hindi stuff, lots of different stuff from different people and different cultures, and wear it and honor it. Love it, cherish it, show it, respect it, right? Do not decide to take those things, copy them, be inspired by them, create, and then talk about how inspired you are by this. And this is inspired by this, and create and sell. At that point, you are appropriating culture. You are taking funds that are needed from people who need them. And you are really contributing to your own destruction as well as the destruction of other people. Right? You're really contributing to this broad exploitation based thought process. Uh, and you're being really dishonorable and disrespectful. In some cases, you might be contributing to somebody's actual death. Let's be real. There are many groups, especially in this country that I live in, where people are poverty level, and this actually feeds them, right? So for you to take that while you're sitting in a nice safe space and making buku anyways is really fucked up, right? um, Other ways to appropriate things as opposed to appreciate things: mocking, always appropriation. um, Fetishizing, always appropriation. Recently we've had somebody, uh, it depends, Shayla. Some things are perceived as not being okay, not because their history or truth makes them not okay, but because somebody thinks that they're not okay. Some things are going to be not okay to one person and okay to another person, right? So it does depend. We were talking about tattooing and medicine. Mean I'm heading out for an appointment and I wanted to get out this. Um, Recently we've had, especially in the online world, where somebody is coming over and appreciating our culture in Turtle Island by going to powwows and hunting aunties and you know uh, biting white sage. uh, in this, there is absolutely appreciation as coming from another culture and going to a powwow and showing the dancers and talking about the beautiful regalia they're wearing and how this is ceremony, and asking people, what does this, what is this for you? What does this, why? Talking to other people and uplifting indigenous voices about this experience. So you can find out things like the fact that it was outlawed for children to dance in indigenous style for a long period of time, and for a long period of time we couldn't do this, right? So you can find out those things, and you can find out the truth of what is going on in indigenous culture, right? That is uplifting indigenous culture. It is absolutely appropriating indigenous culture to go in and go, look at all the hotties and the bodies, and stuff like that in the middle of a powwow when we're talking about ceremony and culture and something important. Um, it is absolutely appreciation if you are walking through and you see somebody burning sage and you ask them about it and they tell you what the ceremonial properties and how this matters and different things. And then they offer you that white sage as a gift and explain to you that, really you should never buy this. This is really a gift thing, and explain to you those things. And then either record that interaction with their permission or you explain these things. I'm not sure how that person got white sage. I can assume that they asked for it and were given it. um, and bit it on their TikTok, like they were going to eat it. Right. That is absolutely appropriation. It is not uplifting Indigenous voice. It is not giving any knowledge, and it is mocking a culture. It is absolutely cool to appreciate the aunties are a unique motherfucking thing, right? Thank you so much, love. Um, it is absolutely, absolutely, appropriate to look and go, wow, man, I wouldn't mind having me an auntie because they're like fierce, right? It is an entirely different thing to go out and decide that all you want is an auntie and that you're getting an auntie to accomplish some notch in your belt that fetishizes Indigenous women. That is inappropriate. So we can see where appropriation and appreciation can be two different things in the way you're interacting as well. Not only on the how you're purchasing, not only on the how you're wearing, but also in the way prairie sage absolutely. The other thing is white sage is one of 39 species. European sage exists and you can burn European sage, right? You can burn roses, you can burn lavender. There's thousand different things for air cleansing. Um, what you can wear and what you can't wear really depends on how you're getting it in a lot of ways. A couple years ago, the anti-lynching bill finally passed, and a group of House people stood on the steps of Congress, all wearing kente cloth. Now, I don't know how they came across it, and how they came across it really tells us whether this is appropriation or appreciation. If one of the black congressmen had come in and handed out kente cloth and said, in honor of passing this bill that we should have passed 100 years ago, right? We should all wear this in honor of Emmett, in honor of, what has happened in the last 100 years, how long it took. We should all wear this as we're standing united. uh, you know, this is absolutely appreciation. This is absolutely support. This is absolutely uplifting. It doesn't matter what your skin color is. You were asked by a black man to wear the kente cloth and to support and uplift in this show of unity with black people. That is appreciation. If Nancy Pelosi walked in and handed them out and said, "We're all going to wear these and united to show appreciation," and all this sort of stuff, that is appropriation. There are certain things that we consider to belong to certain cultures that don't actually belong to certain cultures. They're more universal belonging. There are certain things that we want to decide belong to everybody and they don't. Tattoos, like the chin tattoo, Turtle Island Indigenous. Everybody's been braiding their hair for thousands of years. Everybody, everywhere. It's the simplest way to do your hair before rubber bands. French braids are really old everywhere. Um, Braiding specific patterns that are used to escape from slavery into the south, from the south into the north, into your hair because they were maps, not okay. If you go to Africa and you are visiting with the Bantu people and a Bantu woman puts Bantu knots in your hair, you are appreciating culture. You are a part, you are being welcomed in, you're being loved. You should wear it with pride and honor because that's why you were given the Bantu knots, right? That is absolute appreciation of culture. If you were to then come back, hi Tiff, and then come back and start doing Bantu knots for everybody else, that is appropriation of culture. We can see where cultural appreciation versus cultural appropriation really has more to do with just this is owned by somebody. It also has to do with who put it on you, where it comes from, how you got it. Okay. Um, and it also has to do with, I mean, some things are very specific, right? Like, don't wear a feathered headdress. It is literally a purple heart. It's really wrong to wear a war bonnet, right? You can wear feathers braided in your hair. We've all been doing that since the Neanderthals. But wearing a war bonnet, not only that, but any eagle feathers or birds of prey you wear in the United States is illegal unless you're a card carrying, person of a nation, right? So you can't be doing that either. This is appropriation versus appreciation. Um, I am going to go because I do have my appointment. Much love to everybody else. Tomorrow I will probably be working on the book again, and we'll probably do kind of an arty thing again since I got it fixed. There's my alarm. Sorry. Since I got that fixed, so we'll probably be working on that again tomorrow. Uh, Everybody have a wonderful evening, and much love to everybody. Please remember, you are worthy just by being here. You are needed just by being here. Everything that you are experiencing, the pain and the depression, this is because this world is not working right now, right? And your understanding of that change is needed in this world. We are all necessary. We are all needed. Uh, Remember, you are worthy and you are loved today. Take a great afternoon. Take care, and I'll see you guys tomorrow at some point. I'll try and put up a live alert so everybody knows. Bye, guys. And bye over on YouTube. Have a great day, guys.